Chapter 5 The Shadow and the Higher Self. Feeling quite curious upon the middle way, there arose obstacles and challenges wherever we happened to look. It was not as simple as listening to someone else for advice, nor was it easy to find the answers in an old sacred book. There didn't seem to be a modern representation of the middle way. Not much we could find in the technological age. Yet I found that the proper stability between the right and the left brought balance, and so I began to think of them as wise old sages. Knowing there was also a brilliant source within the heart, the left and right sides reassured me that we were indeed upon the middle way. But after much time of waiting for that inner voice of wisdom within to speak, in time, there was only silence, she came to say. Turning back to the outside, I couldn't understand why that inner voice remained so silent. The voice on the left and right had so much to comment. Meanwhile, it was only I who could take action based on what any one voice within us might think. Observing the world, many ideas arose as guides from their unique point of view. But it was up to something called the me, which could decide what perspectives we would live through. Knowing we were all seekers, there was an intense focus to remain upon the middle way. And after much time searching, there was a sense of frustration, anger, and extreme irritation when it felt as if we'd been led astray. Searching back and forth, we looked high and low. Then a dark voice spoke from down below.
"You'll never find the truth without me,"
said the voice that followed us like a shadow. It was behind us all along, hanging from my seat below the feet. As I rose, I tried to walk away from it, but it followed us wherever we went, and this force was so dark, yet discreet. Next, I tried to walk faster, but it followed from behind our back. I can't shake this thing. It looks like it's attached. "This dark side of you represents the hidden and concealed parts of you that no one else knows," said the left hand of God. "Well, what is it?"
"It's called the shadow,"
said the right hand of God. Finally, I turned to face it, and it was horrifying to see. It appeared as a dragon with 7 heads that had been watching from behind, and it knew all the dark and dirty secrets about me. It knew my cravings, and it knew all the times I'd done wrong when I could have chosen right. It knew all the times I had failed, and it witnessed every time I had lost sight in this life. Now I began to run, but the shadow didn't miss a single step. I tried to jump and hide, but my shadow never left. "Turn on the lights!" I yelled. Both my left and right hands were frantic to find a light switch within this hall, and there I found a candle when I got so close to the light that no shadow could be found. Finally, I took a deep breath, and it appeared that the crazy shadow had finally sunk.
"I know you're a very crafty person, but you'd make a better drunk,"
said the shadow. Even though I couldn't see the shadow this close to the candlelight, it was still there behind us, and so I ran in search of booze, wine, or alcohol.
"Don't you dare,"
said the right hand of God. My right hand was searching for beer, but maybe beer wasn't enough, and so I put my right hand in my pocket when I reached with my left hand in search of vodka to locate the stronger stuff. "I'll support you always and forever, but is this what we need? Is alcohol poison or medicine? So ask yourself if this is the best way to proceed," asked the left hand of God. I loved both sides of our soul equally, but the right hand was often pretty stuck up about righteousness. It was so rigid about the right way. But what do you do when a terrible shadow is following us? My left hand was shaking as it searched for a bottle of vodka, and that's when I realized there was something creeping up behind our hand. The shadow was right there beneath us, and it was still concealed, looking up at us from behind our back.
"Go on. Why not get the big bottle and drown your sorrows? Get a few beers while you're at it. There isn't nothing we have to do today or tomorrow,
said the shadow. What the hell is this thing? And why can't we escape? It's following each and every step we take. Why would something so terrible be connected to our fate?
The shadow is the blind spot of the psyche. It's the repressed nature within us that we cannot quite see. It represents the blocks, restrictions, and constraints that keep us from being free,
said the right hand of God. I wanted a drink badly, and not for the taste, but because I wanted to avoid these feelings.
Alcohol will definitely numb the shadow, but if you get drunk, then eventually you're going to have to face an even darker monster,
said the left hand of God. What do you mean?
You want to show him, or should I?
Asked the left hand of God.
I'll take him,
said the right. Terrified by my own shadow, I took a step forward with my right foot. Then the left would follow, and so I allowed them to take hold of my body because I was willing to do whatever it took. To my surprise, the right hand of God led me into the party of the pyramid where we found the bar.
Take a seat, but only order water,
said the right hand of God. Why's that?
Go on and observe the crowd,
said the right hand of God. For 2 hours and 8 minutes, we observed the drug-fueled party, and at first it was a cheery type of atmosphere, but in time, I understood what alcohol had done to these people. They were numbing their bodies, and that's when their shadows really appeared. An old man's shadow came out first. He was the typical drunk, and as I observed him, he'd glance over his shoulder to look at a young 20-year-old's butt. His shadow had taken control, and I could see it in his eyes. In this case, alcohol was a poison because it was opening his spirit and granting his body free access to his darkest side. Before long, the bar was filled with shadows, and all it took was a sip to crack open the soul where the shadow was desperate to explore. There, the dark side of us would emerge. Here I found how the shadow was driven by primal instincts, at times violent and almost always concealed, and so the shadow was quite emotional. Why don't these people just stop and heal?
Because the shadow is the unconscious part of our character, and it does not always align with the higher version of us,
said the right hand of God. And how do I fix it?
You could start by doing prayer, chanting, meditating, or yoga,
said the left hand of God. After looking to these methods, I was sure there had to be some other remedy or medicine within reach. But who could help cure this wretched shadow? It seemed that fixing my dark shadow was something that no one else could teach. I noticed that as long as I did yoga daily, my shadow stayed at bay. If I was aligned in the body, mind, and spirit, then I could mute what the shadow had to say. It worked for a while, but if I missed a week of yoga, oh goodness, that shadow came out. And I'll be damned if I cracked open even a single beer, because by the end of the night, that shadow would make itself known. And so the shadow kept me up that night. It was in my head trying to start a fight. It grew so loud and angry that I could not even search for answers from the left or right.
So many guides try to teach and preach, but in time, my shadows emerge. And most teachers just want to be noticed, paid, praised, or maybe they're doing what appears important, but I always know who's gone absurd. Did you know that the modern world is ruining the most sacred teachings? Nowadays, people follow religions because they want something. But what happened to the sacredness and humility from these once genuine instructions? Modern teachings have been a circus where teachers are obsessed with gaining followers,
said the shadow. That night I was overwhelmed, and I couldn't get away from it. It was clear that I'd been repressing my shadow while it went off on its rant.
Oh, how confusing it is to seek help upon the path, and have the teachings become a business in the West? And how can I seek to find silence and ease in this mind? Meanwhile, the shadow might be right, that the true teachings are usually burned in books or kept as hidden secrets. Who can even help us fix our shadows? And are some teachers just obsessed with their image while acting upon a stage?
And every time my mind tried to outwit the shadow, or even reason with it, this dark shadow had even more to say.
You've got to admit people are selfish, and most teachers are trying to profit by finding more followers. They'll post it on Instagram, and maybe if we're lucky, they'll add a quote from scripture. But you know that as soon as someone posts about God, then that post will get overlooked or censored, which means your engagement metrics will go down. So it's nearly impossible to cultivate an environment to share the essence of the sacred teachings. And let's say you find a way to share the wisdom of the sages. There's too much ignorance in the world for the population to understand. It's more fruitful to post pictures of your abs or ass, because then you'll get noticed with your Instagram brand. If you want to focus on your ego, then you'll have a better chance to go viral. Listen to your shadow. Give me the reins to your Instagram, and I'll take over,
Yelled the shadow. At some point in the night, we managed to drift to sleep, but by the time I got up for a new day, everywhere I went, so too the shadow would creep. We need a solution fast. Do either of you have a plan? I asked the left and right hand. You're going to have to trust me on this. Roll cannabis in a joint and smoke it, said the left hand. I did what the left hand said, and I even forced the right hand of God to comply. We smoked that joint and inhaled the smoke of the herb into our lungs. But why? We've got to get high, said the left hand of God. Why do we want to get high? If you can imagine that the shadow is our lower nature, then when it's not integrated properly, it can keep us from being aligned with our optimum state. We need to visit our higher self, because it holds the highest wisdom which can help us become great. The higher self sees the view of what's in front of you. It's the entry into our dreams, fantasies, goals, and ambitions. Now you must know that in a few hours you'll come back down to reality. But until then, connect with the higher self and get a bit of much needed wisdom. After you get some perspective of wisdom, then comes integration. Then we've got to put our work into action. And just know that the more we suppress the shadow, the more likely it is to erupt and cause each side of us to feel separated. Have you ever heard of the woman stabbing her husband 100 times? Or what about a serial killer? They let their shadow side take control of their body completely. And once you do that, it only gets darker. If you don't deal with your shadow, then it's going to deal with you. Now take a big puff of the cannabis. We need to visit the high self so that we can plan out a great breakthrough, said the left hand of God. Since we were within the pyramid of debauchery, and this was a giant party, it was easy to find a joint from a stranger, so the lungs inhaled the smoke within me. As the smoke spread, the shadow started to drift. Imagine it like a storm clearing away, and now those nasty thoughts could no longer persist. It was a clear and blue sky mind, and up here I was not restricted or confined. It seemed that the left hand of God was right. We were ascending and elevating, and there was so much wisdom we were able to find. As we rose up, we found a pleasant cloud. Why, it shielded us from down below, and there was only one voice that spoke out loud. The high self was before us. The high spirit arrived. This uplifted spirit caught my senses, mind, and body by surprise. Why, I felt so alive, and from up here, I could barely see the shadow, which was down so far below. Hey, high spirit, it just hit me. There's a dark force following us from down below, and I need you to kill it.
Kill it?
Asked the higher self. Yes, please get rid of it.
Don't quit,
it said. No, that dark part is bullshit. I didn't sign up for this. I've been around the shadow before, and only now do I seem to recognize it. That beast needs to quit it.
What if taming the beast was not a matter of intellect or skill,
But what if taming the shadow is a matter of will? Do not worry about what's behind or what's ahead. Simply go forth and depart from my higher kingdom, since you do not have to agree with what the shadow says. That's the real wisdom, said the high self. That sounds great and all, but how could anyone manage to face something so dark? The Buddha faced the darkness. So did Jesus for 40 days and 40 nights as he discovered the power within his heart. Notice how although the Buddha is pictured in meditation, the Buddha did more than remain still. He left his comfort behind to understand the true nature of reality, and he was able to tame his shadow by the sincerity of the power of will. This is what made him still, through curiosity and contemplation. He did not quit, but rather he entered into it. And look at him, gone from this world, yet always within. That is why when it comes to the shadow, we cannot kill it. You can't disconnect with it, but rather it is energy, and it can be transmuted. So when it comes to Jesus or other saints, this can be seen as a halo we transmit. The same way coal becomes a diamond under immense pressure, so gold is purified by heat. The nature of reality that the Buddha sought to understand came when he looked at the dark parts of himself and learned to embrace it. Birth and death, higher self and shadow, right or left. When we don't resist, we learn to surrender into the true nature of it, said the high self. But why? To explore and uncover, to test the limits of the body and the mind, and to feel what it means to discover. That's our Buddha nature, that wakefulness within us all, the ability to work with all situations in front of us, and that's the soul's highest call. Buddha nature has no yearning, and yet it exists in a centered state. Now for some time, you've elevated yourself to visit the enlightened mind, but you can learn to do this without medicine. After all, that's how the Buddha became awake, said the high self. But that shadow has got to die, and I want to stay up here with you. I realize that you, as the higher self, have all the wisdom in the universe, so I prefer when you tell me what to do. The shadow is actually your greatest teacher. Believe it or not, the dark part of the shadow is trying to help us grow, said the high self. Not sure if I believe you. It's messing with my emotions and making me suffer. Same thing happens to gold when it gets hotter. It starts to be purified from the fire, and I know it's getting unbearable, but our situation is dire. Remember that what the soul perceives as suffering is energy to awaken us. We can use that force to free ourselves from such suffering, said the high spirit. Observing and watching, listening and reflecting, we began to examine the mysterious nature of this world, which had pushed our awareness beyond its normal limits. This state of existence was not what anyone expected, and could suffering be increasing in order to awaken us? And what if the immeasurable quality is something like grit? Because now I see how the Buddha came to sit, but only because the Buddha did not quit. So now you get it? Asked the higher self. Was this high self a sense of intuition? And how had I forgotten about it until now? Hey, left and right hand, why didn't you remind me that our higher self was a part of us, watching from afar? Why, I'd gotten lost in the mind again, swept up and away, a blue sky mind. And sometimes we forget about this wisdom when we're looking outside, distracted by the events within each day. And what was all that resistance I'd been feeling? I was locked in a drug-fueled party, and every turn felt like a fight. What was the root of all those judgments and feelings that were keeping me uptight? The shadow shows you where you're still attached. It's a reflection of where you're coming to let go. The Holy Spirit burns a bit at the first onset, then we begin to let go. This is the path, not a thing you can do. And if you're not present, you'll miss it. But when it comes to discovering the moment, it's all up to you, said the high self. The muck and mire of life had caught me. I'd lost sight of my own inner map. The mind had taken me into the world, but yet again, we were still lost in it. Which way? I asked.
Only one way off the beaten path. Home,
She said. Home? Now how do I get home? I need help searching for the path. I know there's a middle way. There is only one way. Go forward, and you'll get out of the track. That's the middle way. It is felt, not found, discovered yet unreachable, a calling without a sound. You can never miss it, but it often seems hard to find. It begins by examining the true nature of what is occurring within the mind. Only then can we become aligned, said the higher self. So others have done this before? Some have found the way, and so it may be helpful to hear what they have to say, said the high ghost. Then how will we do it? Talk less, take action, said the high ghost. Talk less and take action. And if you're really good at being with the middle way, you'll let your actions speak so loud there is nothing to say, said the higher spirit. Often I was swayed by the left or right hand of God, and the shadow seemed to trample us as we've been searching for the path. There had to be someone out there that would have the answers, who had already discovered the middle way at last. Now, of course, the left and right hand were masters. There was wisdom within each side that was perfectly aligned, but whenever I favored one over the other, I could never quite make up my mind. Both of them were needed, I can guarantee you on that. But the only problem was that both of them had opposite maps, as if one wants to dig deeper underground and the other was trying to fly in the air. What to make of which way when I don't know where we're going or how to get there? It's anyone's guess, and often I feel quite blind, which makes me scared. Right when that happens, my shadow starts to lurk, and now I feel it coming out. Oh, it's always in there hiding, but I never know what it's thinking about. Meanwhile, the high self seemed to know something about the middle way, like a gut feeling, but still the left and right hands of God would consult with me as they too had something to say. I saw them like two trusted officials, one left and one to the right. Of course, I was a mediator, like an advisor of whatever our mouth would say. But sometimes, both sides would press me so hard until I'd follow one of their ways. When one side really believed in something, oh boy could I get swayed. And after enough time, I felt so fluid that I began to move more like a wave. One night I'd be right, then the next I'd be left. Whatever was happening between us, it was anyone's guess. After a bit of a fight, I turned to the right. I always agreed with virtue and righteousness in almost every case. We agreed on living good lives in harmony and nonviolence, but then the left would jaw in. But what about justice? Said the left hand of God. See, the right hand could hold the weapon, which was very good news. And I believed that the reason the right hand of God was capable to hold the weapon was to protect the ultimate truth. But that truth is how all things change. And so I began to change directions. I leaned over to the left because I was intrigued with change, and I figured that the seasons of nature also embody perfection. That's when the left hand of God gave me the ability to state my objections, and little by little, I began to believe the left side was true as well. Rather than speak in commandments or teachings, the left hand of God used a map in the sky called the vast cosmos. I began to get curious about the history of creation, and this left-hand path worked with energy and transformation. It revealed the nature of the cycles of life and death, and even spoke of our past lineage of incarnations. The left hand of God did not hate, loathe, or want to exclude the side we called the right, but rather the left had a secret which could expose good insight. We call it the left, only because it wasn't quite right, and it also had been around forever, while it seemed to explain how dead trees could come back to life. The left side spoke of karma and karmic ripples, how everything is a chain reaction of itself. The left hand of God spoke of the no self, but this was no one I had ever met. Then every so often, a spurt of magic would arise, but due to the impermanence of change, the spectacle would fade, pass, then die. Its teachings were always changing, but what was it that I never seemed to know? This is the middle way, the path of being with the natural rhythm of life's flow, said the high self. There was a pause before we continued ahead, and so the left and right were beside us as we looked for something else that would be said. Now, as the higher self faded, it seemed to know how to progress to the peak of our potential. I'd gotten a glimpse of all I could be from that higher self, but only it knew the path to the higher realms of the pure potential which was transcendental. There is nowhere else to be but right where you are. And as for that shadow, have you noticed that the darkness in the universe cannot dim the light of a single burning star? Do you feel alone in this world? Just remember that we are diving for light. Before long, others will look to our path, and there they will find a way home because of the brave souls who were not overcome by the dark night, said the higher self. I need to be honest. I think I like being high. Maybe you can keep us in this higher space, because I feel even more alive. Now I could no longer see the higher self, and then it whispered one last sentence down to me. The goal isn't to get high. The goal is to get free.